Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Ross. Thank you, everybody, for joining this Greater Manchester COVID briefing. We will give you some reflections later on the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday on the delayed step 4 on the roadmap. But first, I'll ask Sir Richard Lees to take you through the latest data for Greater Manchester. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Andy, and good afternoon, everybody. If we could put the first slide up, that'd be really helpful. Start as always with prevalence, and this is the number of cases per 100,000. As you can see, that we've now had an increase in every district in Greater Manchester, which is clearly not good news. The rate of increase continues to slow down. It looks like we're now doubling at about every 3 weeks, whereas I think last press conference it was every 2 weeks, but these are still clearly very, very high numbers indeed. But I think when we dig beneath them, that we'll see that they're perhaps not quite as bad as they look. And these are numbers that are now increasingly reflected in other parts of the country. Indeed, the other parts of the country are now have overtaken Greater Manchester in terms of their prevalence rates. If we turn to the next slide, this is what's happening with over 60s. As always, these were the people that were most likely to be hospitalised. Slightly less the case now, because even where we've got positive tests reflected in other parts on over 60s, they are far less likely to be hospitalised if they have been double vaccinated. So clearly, a double vaccine doesn't make you totally immune, but it both reduces risk of catching the virus and also tends to reduce the impact of the virus if you do catch it. So the over 60s rates are again increasing at a slightly slower rate than the overall prevalence rates, and we'll see that reflected in the next slide. We've got one coming down, which was Bolton. Its overall prevalence going the other way, but again everywhere else going in the same direction. You'll see a couple of big jumps there, but again, for over 60s, relatively small numbers of cases can lead to quite high change figures. If we turn to the next slide, this is the one that I think for the certainly last 6 weeks has been really telling the story. And just look at the 16 to 29-year-old everywhere, really. It's shown all over Greater Manchester. That's where the vast bulk of the numbers are. The vast bulk of these are people who are asymptomatic, testing positive. We are now beginning to see some bleeding into other age groups. The one I'll draw particular attention to is the one below the 16 to 29-year-olds, 0 to 15-year-olds, where again we're beginning to see an increase in the number of positive tests. I probably ought to technically say positive tests rather than cases, because most of them are asymptomatic. It's very little illness, but we are seeing positive tests in primary age children as well at the moment, an increase. Clearly, there is an expectation that once we hit the end of, July the 19th, when most schools will have broken up for summer, we expect to see a significant decrease in the rate for both 0 to 15s and 16 to 29s. If we move to the next slide, this is what's happening with care homes. Again, the figure's very, very low indeed. This is good news, but and again, I think shows the effectiveness of vaccination. Very, very high proportion of care home residents have been double vaccinated, and we're making, I think, reasonable progress with care home staff to get as many of those vaccinated as well. If we turn to the next slide, which is what's happening with hospitals, and I think this is, a good indicator. You'll see when you look at the number of beds occupied, there's been relatively small increase over the past week. If you look at ICU beds, that number has stayed the same. I think this reflects a number of things. First of all, the number of hospitalisations that go on to ICU is relatively small. In fact, the proportion has dropped in the last week. It's also hospital stays are on average shorter than they were a long time ago. And it's also how the rest of the system kicks in. That certainly we've got information from across Greater Manchester that suggests that social services, the care sector, continue to do a really, really good job in managing discharges from hospital, and particularly discharge to assess, something they've been doing remarkably well on. They're keeping that up, and that's clearly helping us manage what's going on in our hospitals. I think this point to say, I've said it, I think the last two press conferences, there is still very significant pressure on every single part of the health system, hospitals, GPs, dentists, opticians, high demand. There is a long way from being under sufficient pressure to cause a collapse in the system so far, but it is a concern, and particularly the number of people who are going to A&E and the number of people who are trying to get GP appointments at the moment. And certainly the evidence of the people going to A&E is the level of acuity and the reasons they're going. It warrants them going. So this is a lot. There is always an element of people going to A&E because they can't go anywhere else. This does seem to be genuinely sick people who are turning up at A&E. In terms of elective recovery, we continue to make good progress on that and are probably ahead of expectation in terms of what the acute sector is doing in spending the elective recovery fund. It's still going to be a long haul, even if we're ahead, it's still a long haul, but there's not been an interruption of that, and that's continuing. And generally urgent care cases, again, continue to be managed as well. There are issues, again, across the whole sector now of increased numbers of people self-isolating, and that does put additional pressure on the staffing within our hospital. So the message is a consistent one. If people are sick, they should contact the doctor, they should ring 111, and if necessary, if it's really urgent, go to A&E, call an ambulance or go to A&E. So we want sick people to seek attention, help, seek attention. If you're not in those circumstances, then please let's try and keep the pressure off the system, because there is a lot there. Turning to the next slide, which is the vaccination slide. So I think Andy will probably say a little bit more about reactions to, well, the announcements yesterday from the Prime Minister, but also today from Sajid Javid and Gavin Williamson. I think they've all said that we're not out of the woods, really. The epidemic isn't over. The intention is to move from regulation to guidance on July the 19th. We still have an epidemic to manage. The most important thing at the moment in managing that epidemic is, if you are offered a vaccine, it is to get vaccinated. When you've had your first vaccination, get your second one as quickly as possible. You see in the 50 plus age ranges, we're pretty close to getting to the 85% mark, second vaccination across the whole of that age range. We want by July the 19th to have reached the 85% mark for first vaccinations for all age groups, and made some real progress there. The real challenge is still the 18 to 40 year olds. I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing about that in a minute, but certainly would welcome things like vaccine passports for people returning from amber countries to give people an incentive to get vaccinated. It is the single biggest precautionary step we can take to keep yourself safe and to keep other people safe at the moment. So we're not out of the epidemic yet, and as we move to guidance, it's something we said here previously, that all of us can do things to care for ourselves and to care for others. And again, I think Andy will say more about this, but a really good example is we know that the major source of transmission of the virus is through aerosols. That's through the air we breathe out, it's through coughing, it's through sneezing. If that's a major source of transmission, wearing masks in confined spaces indoors helps protect other people. And what we would really be urging people to do is to take those reasonable measures on a voluntary basis, but reasonable measures with good reason, because it protects themselves, it protects their families, it protects others. Turning back to vaccinations, we are actively promoting vaccinations in a number of ways. And if we go to the next slide, this is a couple of slides. I think we can scroll down on this, which is about a campaign aimed very directly at that younger age group, the 18 to 24-year-olds, probably the hardest group. Really try and encourage, promote as far as possible that age group getting themselves vaccinated for their own good and for the good of other people. We're also doing some business-to-business promotion through the growth company as well. And I think we've got another slide on this, which might, yeah, here we go. This is the first half of this. The top half is something that the growth company have been doing for a while. The bottom half about continuing to follow COVID secure guidance, follow the guidance, get tested twice a week, get both doses of the vaccine is, I think, new advice. And clearly, as we go into the period past July the 19th, giving very, very clear guidance to people, simple guidance, and the reasons why it makes sense is going to be really, really important. While we're sticking with vaccine, this is probably the last thing. We are continuing to do all those things to try and take vaccine to people. We're looking to take vaccinations into bigger employers so we can get people vaccinated at work. We're doing pop-ups. We're doing all of those local things. There's a pop-up in the city centre at the weekend which ran out of vaccine. We recognise that even as we go past July the 19th, this is still a big, big job around containment, and we're going to continue to work at it. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. So just to build on what Richard was saying, I think the reality is we're now entering a new uncharted phase of the pandemic. And obviously we will have to think about our messaging in that context, responding to yesterday's announcements. Looking at the polling, I think there'll be many people in Greater Manchester who are feeling a little uncertain today about what lies ahead. Obviously, we had the announcement from the government yesterday, broadly support the direction of travel, although, as you know, not with regard to the removal of the requirement to wear face coverings on public transport, which I was making clear yesterday. But I think, listening to the announcement and the way it was delivered, I think the public will be feeling uncertain because on the one hand, we were hearing a story of cases still rising, still being in the kind of upward curve, if you like, of this Delta wave. The Health Secretary talking of 100,000 cases a day. It doesn't follow for people, therefore, that you say remove all restrictions. So I think the government needs to think about its messaging in this particular moment in time and build that reassurance amongst the public. As I've said, we made clear, as did other mayors, that we did not think it was the right thing to do to remove the requirement to wear face coverings on public transport. But it's a case of we are where we are, and we need now to respond to the position that Greater Manchester is in relation to this new advice. I think it is a fact that the places that have had higher case levels throughout the pandemic will be at greater risk in the coming period. And I think it's really important for us to be honest with people here about that greater risk and then work with people to manage it as best we can amongst ourselves. So I just wanted to say a couple of things in relation to that. The first is around face coverings, speaking with the other leaders in Greater Manchester this morning, we've agreed that the right approach is to continue to strongly encourage the wearing of face coverings on public transport in Greater Manchester, on our trams, trains and buses. And that is a message that we will seek to get out, perhaps in new ways with announcements on trams. We will certainly be continuing to monitor levels of compliance. We will want to support and encourage people to wear face coverings in any way that we can. We've stopped short of enforcement. We could only enforce here in relation to our tram system. And the reality is it would be very difficult to do that when there is a different message at a national level. We feel it would be a recipe for confusion, potential tension. It'd be very difficult for people working on the transport system to enforce, and would put staff, bus drivers, for instance, in a very difficult position. So we are saying we will strongly encourage rather than enforce, but we will also seek to make sure we refresh the messaging about why it's important to wear a face covering. It's come over to me in the last 24 hours how some people still think it's about protecting themselves when they're wearing that face covering in a crowded or confined space. And of course, it is about protecting other people, particularly people who may be at greatest risk, people undergoing chemotherapy, people who have a compromised immune system in one way or another, people with disabilities, older people. And the point that I think we do need to get over again, which does appear to have been lost in recent times, is that some people fully taking their own freedoms from the 19th of July might take away other people's freedoms. And if we all think about it in that way and doing what we can to look after each other, and particularly have regard to people who may feel they are not able to use public transport after the 19th of July, if they do not see wide wearing of face covering. So it is about reinforcing that this isn't just people taking an individual decision to do what they like. It is about reminding people that we are in a pandemic and we do need to look out for each other, particularly those who are at greater risk of COVID-19. And we'll be seeking to strengthen our messaging in that regard in the coming days and weeks as we come towards the 19th of July. The second point is just to build on what Richard was saying around take-up of the vaccination programme. I think, as you just saw, we're getting close to the point where 85% of our over 50s have had the double jab, and that is a really good position to be in, although we do need to increase levels of compliance amongst younger people. But particularly if I take you back to that age breakdown at the start of Richard's slides, it is clear that there is a considerable degree of transmission amongst the 16 to 29 age group, and particularly amongst those teenagers within that age group. We have made the case here to the JCVI that 16 and 17-year-olds should now be called forward for vaccination, and we want to reiterate that point today. Higher case areas are at greater risk going into this next uncharted phase of the pandemic, and we need to do everything we possibly can to mitigate those risks. And we are very clear here in Greater Manchester that vaccinating or calling forward 16 and 17-year-olds for vaccination will help us manage those risks, particularly as those teenagers return to college in the autumn. We think that will be a much more sensible thing to do, to call those young people forward for vaccination now, and we reiterate that call today. So this isn't about trying to go against everything the government has said yesterday. As I indicated, we broadly support the direction of travel, with the exception of the decision on face coverings. But there are things that can be done to mitigate the risks, and calling forward 16 and 17-year-olds for vaccination is definitely one of them. So I will leave my own comments there. There's much more we can get into in answer to your questions. So Ross, I will hand back to you to take us through colleagues' questions today.
Thanks very much. If colleagues in the media could indicate that they want to ask a question by raising their hand, then I'll be able to come to you, enable your microphone, and you can ask your questions. So if you just raise your hands, it just says, well, we will be finishing slightly earlier at 3:25 today. So we're going to go to Niall Griffiths at the MEN. Niall, if you can just unmute your mic, say who you are and ask your question, please.
Yeah, it's Niall from the MEN. Just going to get a reaction to the Education Secretary's recent announcement regarding the end to the bubble system in English schools. He announced this a week after more than 500,000 pupils across the country, including more than 6,000 in Oldham alone, were out of the classroom, as well as announcing an end to compulsory mask wearing and social distancing. Are these the right changes to do when rates in Greater Manchester are so high? And if not, what is the right thing to do?
Should start off on that. Well, first of all, I'd say largely it is the right thing to do, and in a sense, you almost answered your own question, Niall. But if I use Manchester's figures rather than Oldham's, last week we had over 10,000 school students out of school self-isolating. The vast majority of those were asymptomatic and indeed testing negative, and we had 650 teachers out of school as well. And that is, I think, bad from every point of view, but particularly for the education of those young people. And clearly, we have to find a different way of managing that. So, and I think the different way is to say that contacts will still be identified through test and trace. They will be tested twice a week in school, but we'll only move to self-isolation when they are testing positive, rather than everybody having to be able to isolate. In some cases, whole year groups having to isolate because there is one positive case in the whole year group. The only thing I slightly worry about is in the Secretary of State's announcement is it's moving for test and trace to be being run entirely by national test and trace. This seems to be making the same mistake that's been made over and over again. This should be actually a combination between local and national test and trace, with very much an emphasis on the local element of it, not least because local has over and over again, not just in Greater Manchester, but everywhere, showed itself to be more effective than the national system.
I mean, I just would obviously support what Richard's just said, Niall, but just to add, the position has clearly become unsustainable in schools. The rate of absence from Greater Manchester schools remains far higher than the England average. So something had to give. So on this occasion, we're not necessarily arguing against what the government is saying, but given the level of spread amongst school-age children, I again come back to the point about face coverings. It doesn't follow for me that we should just remove all of those requirements when obviously schools have been shown to be in recent time an area of higher spread. So broadly support what's being said. Welcome the move to more testing rather than isolation. But I think there are still things that could be done, simple things that would just mitigate those risks a little further.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to Jen Williams. Just to say as well, currently nobody else is indicating that they'd like to ask a question. So if people could indicate if they do want to ask a question, we'll come to you after this. Jen, your mic is enabled. If you could say who you are and where you're from.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. Jen Williams from the MEN. I actually wrote out my question so I wouldn't miss anything. So it's a question for both of you, if that's all right. Just on the health indicators, I realise obviously that our COVID admissions aren't anywhere near where they were in the second and third waves, but you've also said on a couple of occasions that the system's under unprecedented demand from all angles, and we've reported on aspects of that over the last couple of weeks. We talked about North Manchester General at the weekend being in a lot of difficulty in its A&E. So I wondered whether you thought the system would be able to cope with the inevitable increase of COVID patients we'll see as a result of unlocking, even if that's a relatively modest number. Is there enough capacity in the system to be able to deal with that? And is there a potential, if it can't, for the elective recovery programme to be paused or slowed down? Thanks.
Richard, do you want to come in on that one first?
Well, first of all, Jen, I'm not going to say never, because clearly if the world changes, then if circumstances change, we'll have to react differently. But looking at the numbers where they are now and where they are modelled to be in the immediate future, waiting times in A&E across the system, and I'm going to talk across the system, are pretty much the same as they were pre-COVID. So I think we'd like them to be better, but they're certainly managing as well as they were in the pre-COVID world. Hospital occupancy is, on average, it's around about 87% across the whole system at the moment. But that rather more reflects the increased number of people who are getting urgent care and elective recovery treatments in a timely way than it does the COVID. On ICU beds, which is clearly where the big challenge comes, and this is not just for COVID, this overall occupancy is 73%. We have one hospital that's up to 86%, but at the moment, all of our hospitals have ICU capacity. So the waiting time in A&E is in line with what we had pre-COVID. Occupancy is manageable. Certainly occupancy in ICU is lower, significantly lower than overall occupancy. Just a reminder that some of our hospitals have actually very small ICUs, so it doesn't take much to fill them up, which is why for a very long period of time we've been operating a mutual aid system. I think the question you asked, Jen, was can the system cope? And I think the system can cope. And if it does get under pressure, that we are still able to bring in surge beds very, very quickly. But at the moment, the numbers I'm giving you are managing the system without having to use surge beds.
Andy, do you want to come in on that one?
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Jen. Just to add that, I certainly have heard health service colleagues this week express appreciation for the piece that you wrote, reflecting the position, because obviously we've all been thinking just about COVID, and there is, as Richard said, that wider pressure in not just the hospital system but primary care as well. One thing we touched on this morning at the GM committee was what lies ahead of us with regard to the autumn and into the winter, because obviously the flu season will be not displacing COVID, but will be additional to it. We didn't see a flu season last winter that we might have expected. So, there is a concern that it could be a bigger flu season this year. So I do think we need to start thinking very seriously about how we support the NHS and colleagues working within it through the autumn and the winter period, because I think it is going to be extremely challenging. So there's a lot of focus on the flu vaccination programme alongside the COVID booster jab, and obviously there'll be a huge effort coming up soon to make sure that we maximise take-up of both.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to Kevin Fitzpatrick. Kevin, you should be able to unmute yourself now if you could just say who you are and where you're from. Kevin, we're not hearing you. You have unmuted, but we're not able to hear you. I'm not sure if it's your headphones. What we'll do is, Kevin, we'll come back to you. If you can just mute. Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to you and give another go in a second. I'll go to Adam Clark. Adam, you should be able to unmute yourself now, and if you just say who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Adam Clark, Roach Valley Radio. Andy, you talked about the polling before, and you talked about the uncertainty that the public will face, or you think that they'll face over the next few weeks. What was the general consensus from other leaders at the committee this morning?
I think the one I voiced, Adam. There's a different position here than perhaps people see in other parts of the country, which is that higher case rate. And of course, the public see that, but then obviously kind of hear the message that all restrictions are being removed, and we're moving to a position of it being more local guidance, local messaging. So that is a different place in which we are about to find ourselves. And I think we are kind of just thinking through now as a Greater Manchester system how we best manage that. So we are in conversations already with TFGM about how we might strengthen that messaging to people about the wearing of face coverings. I think we all felt the same, Adam, that to go down a path of sort of doing something different to what the government has said is not where we should be. It would get very, very difficult to enforce and very confusing. But I think all leaders were in the same place. We will need to watch things very carefully. We will not be standing down our structures. We need to keep a focus on things in this coming period. And we obviously would have preferred some different decisions on relation to public transport. But as I say, we also understand the fatigue that the government, that the public are feeling with all of this. So we do have to get the balance right. Just the final point I would make, Adam, is that the polling has been pretty consistent. So we saw a YouGov poll, I think yesterday, that said 71% support for mandatory face masks on public transport. We have TFGM polling, which isn't maybe quite as high, but it's not far off that. I think Transport Focus have done polling, so it's a pretty consistent picture. And the thing I would say to the government is we have to be careful at this phase of the pandemic not to hear the voices of those shouting the loudest, rather than the silent majority who actually sees the case for proceeding more cautiously. So we're in a position where we're going broadly with the direction of travel, but I think it is right for the Greater Manchester system to exercise more caution given the experience of the pandemic so far and this uncharted phase that we're going into.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, did you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm going to go to Jessica Hay. Jessica, you should be able to unmute your mic now. Just to colleagues in the media as well, we've only got Kevin with his hand up after this, so if you do want to ask a question, please do raise your hand. Jessica, if you just say who you are and where you're from, please.
Hi, it's Jessica from Manchester TV. Just a quick one to Andy. I know we've mentioned about face masks and that you will still be encouraging people to wear them despite them not being mandatory come July the 19th. Did it come as a surprise to you that they are going to remove it as a requirement? Was it quite a big surprise?
Honest answer, yes, it did. When I first picked up late last week that this is where we might be heading, I was genuinely surprised. I think what surprised me, Jessica, is that distancing and masks have both been removed at the same time, because obviously distancing does have an impact on the economy in terms of the number of people you can have in locations or on public transport. And it felt to me that if you were to do something on distancing, it made it more important that we kept the requirement around masks. I think just to add as well, I mean, the fear I've got a little at this moment in time is by saying all restrictions are removed, it can give the impression that there's a sense of normal life has returned. And we know from what Sir Richard said before that it hasn't. We are still in a pandemic. And I thought the argument for keeping masks was also about the visible reminder to people to remember where we are, to think about the environment in which they're in, to look out for other people. So for all of those reasons, I thought I didn't expect this, and there wasn't consultation at a sort of mayoral level, if I could put it that way. And then the last sort of point around it is that I still have the concern that Freedom Day for some will be loss of Freedom Day for others. There will be people who will feel very worried from the 19th of July about venturing out and going on going on public transport, and I kind of struggle to see how that's fair for people who have no choice but to use public transport. So going to a bar or a restaurant or even a nightclub or music event is a choice, and people are putting themselves into an environment through choice, which may pose some risks. For lots of people in Greater Manchester, stepping on a bus, stepping on a tram or a train is not a choice. They have to do that on a daily basis. And for me, that's why that is different when it comes to then the safety of that environment and people's confidence to enter into that environment. So I do feel strongly, as you know, that they've made the wrong call on this, not just from a sort of perspective of managing the virus, but just a fairness perspective about all people's ability to feel comfortable using public transport, which is a necessity for many people in Greater Manchester, rather than an optional choice that they make. But as I say, we are where we are. The decision has been made, but I will be making real efforts with Transport for Greater Manchester over the coming few days to emphasise why people should do the respectful thing and continuing to carry their mask with them and continuing to wear it. I will ask people to put themselves in the shoes of somebody who is going by bus to have chemotherapy. I will ask people to put themselves in the shoes of somebody who has a compromised immune system, somebody who has a respiratory condition. People, that is the reason why we're asking you to wear a mask. We're not, it's not just, this has been portrayed as though it's a pure matter of individual freedom. It is not. This is about the health of us all, and the health of the most vulnerable members of society. And we're asking people to think about this issue in that context. And I think if we kind of portray that more clearly, knowing the fantastic people of Greater Manchester, as Richard and I do, we know that many people will do it. And I think this is just the last point to make. I was interested in the vox pops that many of you were doing yesterday as people were getting off our trams. People were saying they thought they should carry on wearing their face masks. This is where the public are, actually. And I don't think we're going to be asking our public to go to somewhere where they're not. The vast majority of people, I think, see it's important. They're prepared to carry on doing it. And I think we'll be going with the grain. And I'm hoping we'll keep compliance levels, maybe not at the level they're currently at, but certainly as high as we can make them. But thanks for your question, Jessica.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, did you want to come in on that one?
Well, just one thing to add to what Andy said, and this is about the position we are going into now as we move from regulation to guidance. I think Sajid Javid has suggested that if individual premises owners, for example, wanted to try and require their customers to wear masks, that they could do so. I don't think that is tenable, really, because it would put people and potentially, if it's public sector, public transport, for example, employees in a position of trying to enforce things that are not backed by regulation anymore. And we know that like shopkeepers and other people have already suffered abuse for requiring their customers to wear masks. I think we now do have to move to that different position of not expecting people to do what is unreasonable for us to expect them to do, and that's particularly from the employer point of view. But I think, as Andy said, is if we give people in Greater Manchester a good reason why they should do something, I believe the vast majority of them will do that. And I know, for example, as somebody who's an occasional tram user, certainly for the time being, I will continue to wear a mask on the tram. I don't like doing it. It does feel uncomfortable, but there is a good reason why I should do it. So I'll do it.
Absolutely. Can I just add, Ross? Sorry, I think you've prompted a lot of thinking here, Jessica, but just to add, I think we need to look to colleagues in the media as well to help us with this as we go forward from here, because I've seen a lot of comment on social media over the last 24 hours that says if people need to wear a mask, they should wear one, but don't force one on me. I've kind of heard that kind of response. And it shows that kind of understanding of why we wear masks is really not there, I don't think, as it needs to be. In that, it is about you are showing care for others by wearing a mask, and I think we need to sort of combat this completely from that level now and ask people to do it for those broader reasons. And I think, as Richard has indicated, and I have, we think vast majority of people in Greater Manchester will respond to a message of that kind. It really, the anti-mask brigade has kind of sold this as a matter of individual freedom, and it really isn't.
Thanks, Andy. Kevin Fitzpatrick's had some technical issues, but he sent me over his questions, so I think these will probably be the last ones we'll get to. Keir Starmer, this is Kevin Fitzpatrick, Radio Manchester. Keir Starmer and Oldham Council leader Arooj Shah have both used the word reckless to describe the full lifting of restrictions. Why are you more supportive? Second question is the vaccine rollout slowing here as it is nationally, and is that a concern? And his final question is, do you have any view on the news that restrictions on protest that could potentially come with the policing bill in Parliament, do you have any view on those proposed restrictions? Andy, do you want to take that one in the first instance?
As I say, I think the decision on masks is fairly reckless on public transport. I think the case for it was not just because of what it might do to make the travelling environment safer for people. It would have probably meant people were carrying masks with them, so it would have kept wider take up more broadly. Having said that, I also, though, accept that we do need to continue down the path towards a more normal life. But I think we're still in a more interim phase, and my worry is we've jumped too quickly to the end phase. So I'm not going to say the whole policy is reckless, but I do think the decision on masks has not been fully thought through, and for that reason, I do think there is a recklessness there, but I wouldn't apply that to the overall set of considerations that the government has made.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, it's. I think Kevin. I think the other thing I'd say is that I don't see a great deal of point of getting into an argument with Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer around this, because I think the most important thing is that we have key messages to deliver to people in Greater Manchester about what they need to do to help us continue to contain the virus. And I think that's what we should be talking about, and certainly that's what I'm going to talk about. In terms of vaccination, what we're still aiming at across Greater Manchester is a real surge over the next 2 weeks. So not a slowing down, if anything, an acceleration. Certainly getting more volunteers, releasing council staff, local care organisation staff to support the vaccination programme. I showed the slides from the promotional campaigns we're using, the one for 18 to 24-year-olds, the one with employers. There's work going on directly with employers all over the place. The pop-ups are still taking place. So no, it's not slowing down at the moment. It is a real push to make sure that we can, as far as possible, reach that 85% of first vaccination target by July the 19th.
Thanks.
And Ross, the third element was on protest, was it?
Yeah, I can read that question back out if that's helpful. Do you have any view on the news do you have any view on the new restrictions on protests that could potentially come in with the policing bill that was in Parliament yesterday?
Well, we have expressed our concerns about that before, because we have always had a belief in the city region that people have the right to protest, and we respect that right in the way that we police the city region. And I think any draconian approach to this is the wrong thing to do. So we do have concerns about the policing and crime bill and the way that it is approaching this issue. There have been many reasons down not just the decades and the centuries that people have had to take to the streets of city centre Manchester to force social change, and that tradition runs deep within this city. There is a line, of course, where we see protests go over a line, and we don't think that there's a right to protest at any cost. I think when you start to infringe upon the liberties of others and, drag the city to a halt, obviously we do make a distinction between that kind of protest and a more responsible protest. But overall, no, I think we do have concerns about the measures that are proposed, and we will want to continue to police these things in the way that we always have.
Thanks. We do just have one final question. It's a hand up from Jen Williams. Just check, Jen, it's not an old hand. If you're wanting to ask a new question, your microphone's open now. The only thing is we do have to finish in the next few minutes, but you should be able to ask your question now.
Yeah, I just stuck my hand up because I didn't think there was any more questions coming. It was just on crime levels at the moment. We've noticed quite a lot of big major incidents over the last week or so. We've covered a lot of sort of violent crime scenes and stuff like that. Are we seeing an uptick at the moment? And if so, what are you putting that down to? Is that a warm weather thing? Is it an unlocking thing, football? Am I right in thinking that there's a bit of a trend? Because normally we would get a bit of an update from Bev, wouldn't we, if she was coming on the call? Yeah,
thanks, Jen. I think it's all of those things, and you're absolutely right. GMP continue to report huge demand. It is definitely linked to the football. So you will have, well, the MEN reported the damage to some of our trams at the game, not at the weekend, but midweek, the Germany game. So we are working closely, TFGM and GMP, to obviously to manage those events. Hopefully 2 events. There's certainly going to be 1 event tomorrow night, but we're hoping there's another one at the weekend. I think there is obviously now a kind of situation where the announcements of yesterday will kind of bring forward now the prospect of people returning to nightclubs and returning to the city in greater numbers, to music events, etc. And all of that is good, obviously, for the city and the economy. But there is a discussion that we had this morning about the return of the usual Friday night and the usual Saturday night. And if you think about that in the context of everything Richard's been talking about today, with an NHS under real pressure at every level, almost 24/7, the return of that kind of those kind of scenes in A&E will bring a further complication for colleagues in the NHS. And I think there is a feeling that it will be a sort of Friday, Saturday night plus, given that people haven't been able to do all of those things in recent times. So GMP, as ever, working in close partnership with the City Council, TFGM and others to manage all of these pressures. But I think there is if I'm being absolutely honest with you, there is a concern in the kind of immediate period of both pressure on the police and the NHS and how we will manage that. But there is obviously a huge amount of work going on to ensure we do deal with it and absorb it in the best way that we can.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, do you want to come in, and then we will have to finish?
Yeah. Just very, very quickly. It's just worth saying, and this particularly relates to the city centre, that compliance levels from premises have been really, really high. And in the regular reports I get from both GMP and our neighbourhood services staff, so the number of cases I have to take up in terms of premises not operating properly have been minute of late. And actually, it's interesting that although overall crime levels for the city, I'm only talking about city now, are a little above the pre-COVID levels, the city centre itself is still massively below pre-COVID levels. But as Andy said, that what happens over the next few weeks might take us back to the direction we're in previously. But let's say at the moment, city centre crime is probably at an all-time low, actually.
Thanks, Richard. Andy, I think that's us out of time, unless you'd a few final words.
No, not particularly, Ross. Just to thank everybody for joining us, as you always do. We appreciate it. Thanks for listening to what Sir Richard and I have had to say. Hopefully you've got a clear sense of how we're approaching the next few weeks. But we would appreciate your support with that message around strongly encouraging face coverings and getting over the reason why we are still asking people to wear one. But that's it for us today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you.